Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today's podcast will take a deep dive into planning and look specifically at how the recent Banner Review might accelerate the delivery of the UK's NSIPs, the Nationally Significant Infrastructure Projects. Now, reform is certainly overdue. Nick Smallwood, outgoing Chief Executive of the government's Infrastructure and Projects Authority, highlighted the UK's poor track record of infrastructure delivery at the recent TIP Live Summit in London. There he pulled no punches and said, "We take far too long to deliver infrastructure planning. It typically takes as long to get through the planning regime as it does to deliver an asset. That's simply not acceptable. We need to do far better." So how can we do better? Well, we have the new planning and infrastructure bill coming down the tracks, and the reform of the entire planning process is clearly on the government's agenda, with the Deputy Prime Minister Rayner laying out big plans for radical reform with virtually her first strike of the pen. But reform of the approach to planning around NSIPs has been on the cards for some time. As such, the Banner Review was commissioned by the last government at the start of 2024 under then Secretary of State Michael Gove, and has seen Lord Charles Banner KC examine and propose improvements to the planning and approval process. It's fair to say that the issue is coming to a head. Banner published his recommendations on the 28th of October, particularly addressing the issues around challenges and legal delays caused by the judicial review process. So, as we now close in on the end of a 9-week call for evidence, which closes on the 30th of December, it's a great moment to find out the key issues by welcoming Robbie Owen to the podcast today. Robbie is a partner at Pinson Masons and certainly one of, well, if not the leading mind and expert in the field. So, Robbie, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Oh, thank you, Anthony. Delighted to be here and to talk with you about a subject close to my heart and one of real importance to the future of the UK. So, really pleased. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, let's get stuck in. As I explained, the consultation for Lord Banner's review into the planning regime for NSIPs, Nationally Significant Infrastructure Projects, closes at the end of the year. You say that Banner is no silver bullet, but is this really a key moment for change? Is it a key moment to really improve the UK's infrastructure planning process?
I think it really is a key moment because we've had a number of reviews of the infrastructure planning process that we now operate under, which has been in place since 2010 under the Planning Act of 2008. And there have been, as I say, a number of incremental reviews making important but relatively minor changes to the process to improve it. But those improvements haven't really had the desired effect. And now we have a brand new government who are really very keen and anxious to make these changes. And I think given that and our need to deal with infrastructure issues the country faces, now really is, I would say, a critical moment to make some decisions on how to improve our planning processes.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's interesting because you mentioned Stonehenge and you mentioned issues around energy delivery. And of course, it is surely right that people do have an opportunity to debate and to discuss whether those projects are the right ones.
Well, absolutely it is. And I don't think anyone, and I'm certainly not, is suggesting that debate should be prevented. But it's a question of what is proportionate. And if you look at the infrastructure planning system we have for nationally significant projects, that is a process that allows sustained debate and consideration over many, many months. Not least up to 6 months for a public examination of the proposals. That's far more than you get with local planning authorities considering planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act. So I don't accept that this is really all about curtailing debate. It's about containing the debate within a sensible time frame. But it's also about what is the right balance between national need, national priority and local interests. And I think in some respects we haven't got that balance right, or we've fallen into imbalance.
Well, you say that developers are facing real challenges to progress NSIPs, and it's right that things are taking too long. Largely, and this is where Banner comes in, it's due to the judicial review proceedings, proliferating, as you say, at the time when there is an unprecedented number of large projects in the pipeline for consenting over the next 5 years. So how would you describe the Banner Review's true implications for these local and national policies?
I think the Banner Review, which we'll come on to discuss in a minute, has a number of interesting recommendations, and the government is now put out a call for evidence in relation to those. So we won't know until the spring of next year what the government's conclusions are about implementing or not the recommendations. But I think it's important to see the Banner Review in the context of there being a number of things that need putting right in relation to infrastructure planning, and looking at judicial review of end decisions. That's only one of quite a few areas, and all of these areas need to be progressed. And it's only together, if they are all tackled, that will we bring about the sort of improvement in the overall end-to-end system that we need.
Yeah. That's when you layer in the impact of the planning and infrastructure bill, which is coming through as well at the same time. But I suppose before we get into the detail, as someone who's been, as you say, at the heart driving the planning reform for several decades, I don't want to age you, Robbie, but you've been at it for a long while. Are you feeling more or less confident about progress today under this new Starmer government?
Well, I think in relation to progress made by this new government so far in relation to infrastructure planning and indeed planning more widely, it's fair to say we haven't seen much progress to date. They've only been in place, obviously, since July. They did manage to get out, which was impressive, the consultation on changes to the National Planning Policy Framework at the end of July. And indeed, that consultation also included a few proposed changes to nationally significant infrastructure projects and the planning for them. So there's much more to be done, particularly bringing forward, as the government is now hard at work on this planning and infrastructure bill. What I feel more confident about is the fact that the government clearly do want to achieve major reform. I feel much more confident in that respect than I did with the previous several administrations, who I think didn't really want to make major changes, even though they wouldn't necessarily have admitted that. So I feel really confident about the prospect of changes under this government, although progress to date has been limited. But I don't criticise them for that, because they haven't been around for very long. No,
and I suppose they have got the planning infrastructure bill into the King's Speech, so that will, I presume, then flow out in 2025 to become an act and become law. Is that the way you see it?
Well, yeah, the bill's due to be introduced into Parliament in the spring. Who knows whether that's the Whitehall spring of March or May. I don't know. We will find out. But I suspect it will be doing well to get through Parliament by the end of 2025. It might spill over into 2026, but we will see.
Okay. Well, we can always rely on you for a bit of realism there, Robbie, for sure. I mean, exactly which bit of 2025 we shall see. But let's just get back to Banner and dip into 4 issues that you recently flagged up regarding the Banner Review recommendations. Firstly, Banner described it as excessive that those seeking to challenge NSIPs have 3 opportunities to obtain permission for judicial review. So why does he say that? Why is what is the magic number then? Should it be 0 or should it be 2? Or why does he say that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you just said, should it be 0? That is a question no one has actually asked, but it's something that occurred to me in a working group meeting only last week, which is, well, actually, do we need this prior filtering stage, the stage of having to get the court's permission to bring a claim for judicial review? Do we need that in relation to infrastructure projects? Because do the benefits outweigh the costs of that filtering stage, the cost predominantly being one of time? And I'm not convinced, actually, that the benefits of the filtering stage do outweigh the costs of it in terms of time, and therefore this is something I'm certainly going to be saying back to government in the call for evidence. But assuming for now that one is retained, it seems to me that the Banner recommendations of 1 or 2, not 3, make a lot of sense. And I mean, I personally think that if you are to have a prior permission stage, you probably ought to have the ability to appeal that, which would suggest 2 stages, not 1. But I think 3 do seem excessive to me, and I don't really understand why they're felt to be necessary. So I would support this being looked at in the line with the recommendation from Banner. So
just to be clear, those 2 stages would be at the High Court and then at the Court of Appeal.
Yes.
And so the 3rd stage would be some kind of pre-stage, which would be held in where?
Well, I think at the moment there are 2 stages in the High Court and then 1 in the Court of Appeal. And I think that the Banner Review is recommending that there should just be 1 stage in the High Court, which is not taken on paper, as they say, but a stage taken orally before a judge.
Right.
And then if permission is refused, as I understand it, it would then go to the Court of Appeal.
Okay. Oh, you also highlighted the view of Banner that the government should consider the option of raising the permission threshold. So, in other words, making it harder for people to actually bring those cases to start with. I mean, why is that a good idea? How will that help people who want to make a genuine objection to something?
I think the concept behind this is to raise the threshold for what is a genuinely arguable point, which is, the threshold now for getting permission to bring a judicial review is whether the claimant has one or more arguable points. And it doesn't take you long to think about this to begin to see a number of difficulties with this recommendation. And I'm not quite sure if there were to be a higher threshold, quite how you would cast it, how you'd express it. And therefore, this is something I can see all sorts of problems with, actually, in terms of how it will be implemented.
But does that come down to this whole issue of, it's a nationally significant project, so therefore, how much weight should a local objection have? Is that what it fundamentally comes down to?
To me, it does, actually, although that's quite a difficult issue to resolve in the context of judicial review, which is all about the courts exercising a supervision of how government and arms of government are using their powers, and how are they using them lawfully or not. So, whilst judicial review is not about national versus local or variations of that. If it were, then a lot of judicial reviews would never succeed, would they? It's about judicial reviews about whether ministers have acted lawfully. But it seems to me that, in the context of the terms of reference for Banner, I don't think Lord Banner could have gone any further, really. But I think government does have a issue to consider, which is whether the balance between the national interest for these types of economic infrastructure and local interests, whether that balance has been struck correctly, or whether in future, for certain types of, let's call them critical national priority infrastructure projects, whether actually that balance should be more tilted in favour of the national need.
Yeah, no, the reason I flag that is just simply because I know the government is really banking on major nationally significant infrastructure projects to be the driver for the kind of growth that they've promised. Yeah, they will be trying to force these things through.
Well, they will be, and all this talk of with the bulldozers, not the blockers, or whatever Sir Keir Starmer was saying, they're just simply not going to be able to do that with the current system. Even if the Banner recommendations are all approved and implemented, it will not shift the dial markedly at all. If government wants to shift the dial in favour of getting many more of these projects through more quickly, it will need to do something considerably more radical and innovative than it has said to date. And if you look at the forward to the call for evidence by Matthew Pennycook and Lord Ponsonby, the joint ministers, they're not, to me, indicating that they are prepared to do anything particularly radical.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about that. But there's one other thing which Banner highlights, which is the potential use of a small pool of judges with NSIP experience to hear DCO judicial reviews under a so-called NSIP ticket within the planning court. Why is that necessary? Is that simply a kind of an expertise thing to make sure that the judges that are hearing them, they've got experience? It's not a new thing for them. I
think, as with the one about raising the permission threshold, I'm not sure that when you and in fairness, Lord Banner didn't say the case for this was completely clear cut. I think that given in practice that judicial reviews concerning DCO decisions have all been treated as significant planning court claims, which means they're all reviewed by someone called the planning liaison judge in the High Court to make sure that they are allocated to judges with an appropriate level of expertise. Given that, I'm not sure really that there is currently a problem. In fact, I don't think there is a problem with cases to date having been poorly allocated to judges with insufficient experience. I think that actually the cases have been allocated well, such that the judges that hear them have the right background and experience. So again, I'm not sure that this reform would actually achieve anything.
Right, but you have called for more fundamental reforms. In many ways, I think you've said that in certain areas Banner doesn't go far enough. How can Banner go a bit further for you then?
Well, I don't think Banner itself or himself really could have gone much further, because he was appointed by the former Prime Minister to conduct this independent review into the causes of legal challenges brought against the NSIP regime, and to explore the scope and options for improving existing processes. So the terms of reference were always quite limited. Interestingly, he very much focuses on the latter part of the terms of reference, that is to explore the scope and options for improving existing processes. He doesn't really look at the causes of legal challenges brought against the NSIP regime. And that is where I think the government's reform agenda, which the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is going to encapsulate, has a real role. And government, I hope, will consider not only the well-trailed areas where further reforms from those brought about by the last government are needed, but we'll also think about, well, do we need to go further? And in relation to the most important of these infrastructure projects we have in the pipeline, ones I've termed, and others have too, critical national priority infrastructure projects. Do we need some slightly different procedures for aspects of those to be consented that mean that they are better placed to withstand legal challenge?
That's presumably you're talking about energy transmission projects. You're talking about energy generation projects. You're talking about those kind of significant projects which are really going to drive growth.
Yes, exactly. And it's not always ones that would be immediately obvious. So, for example, you can see that some water infrastructure projects are also necessary. I mean, you'll be aware, Anthony, of the plans for major housing growth in the Cambridge area, and that is dependent on at least one of the two new reservoirs that Anglian Water is planning in the Fens. So you could envisage that projects like that, I'm not necessarily saying that project, but possibly, could also be seen as being a critical national priority infrastructure project. So I think this needs thinking about beyond the limit of the concept to date, which is something we see in the energy national policy statements.
Well, there's lots of reform going on around planning at the moment, Rob, which I imagine makes somebody in your position, basically you've got an awful lot of really exciting stuff in front of you. Let's talk a bit more about you, Robbie, because you're a partner and head of infrastructure planning and government affairs at law firm Pinsent Masons, where you worked for the last 11 years. Before that, you were at law firm Bircham Dyson Bell for over 25 years. So what fires you up about planning, Robbie? What you've been doing it over 30 years?
Yeah, 35 actually, and counting. Well, I love it because you're dealing with you're dealing with issues of national importance. You're dealing with projects that actually improve people's lives, prosperity, and health and happiness in many cases, and you're able to make a real difference. And you can also be quite creative, and I like being creative. I'm a creative person, and you also it's a very sort of sociable area to work in, because you're dealing with so many different people from different perspectives and trying to make a difference to them as well. So I think it's just, to me, it's a delicious mix of all of the above, really.
But you're also a role a parliamentary agent. I mean, what is that?
Well, parliamentary agents they originated as being effectively, they weren't necessarily all lawyers, but they were effectively lawyers who were employed by outside of Parliament, that is, outside companies and local authorities and others who needed to go to Parliament and say, look, we need some new powers to build this railway, build this canal, build this water scheme, whatever it might be. And it wasn't just infrastructure; it was also dealing with other forms of local legislation. So, for example, just to give a very topical current example, it's not to do with infrastructure, but the City of London Corporation applied to Parliament last week for a bill to relieve them of the obligation to operate Smithfield and Billingsgate markets, and they have a parliamentary agent for that. So the agent is obviously, in that case, for the local authority, seeking to get approval from Parliament for a new law for whatever it might be. So parliamentary agents, at one stage there were 60, 70, 80 of these people working predominantly in London for those clients. Nowadays, there are about 15 of us that predominantly work in infrastructure, but also do broader things as well.
Yeah, but of course, you've been involved with many major infrastructure and commercial and business development projects, some of which, of course, they take a long while. Have you got a favourite? Have you got a most proud of project that's got over or not got over the line?
Well, gosh, that's a really difficult question. I mean, I had a horrible phase in the early noughties when I kept on successfully authorising projects. Tram schemes come to mind that then didn't get built. So I thought this isn't very good. This is not a very good track record. But I mean, I've had a lot of great clients with some great projects, and a lot have been built more recently, in particular. I think probably I hope I don't upset any client now by singling out one which you've asked me to, but I think the one that has made the most difference to people and to the area and place would be the extension of the Northern Line to Battersea Power Station, which was a project I did for initially Treasury Holdings, who owned Battersea Power Station at that stage. The project was then taken over by the then Mayor of London, someone called Boris Johnson, and he, through Transport for London, took it forward, and I was employed by them to obtain the consenting of that project, which I did. And it's now obviously been operational for about 4 years, I think, and it's made a massive difference to that part of London, and it's now a great destination and has supported some good developments. Yeah,
I mean, it's an interesting project because it did require, I imagine, a consultation and liaison with a huge number of parties, because there's an awful lot of people who are involved in that whole development project there. Yeah.
Well, totally. Local authorities, landowners, developers, lots of other bodies as well.
Yeah. You also formed the National Infrastructure Planning Association. Well, certainly you were one of the key people behind the formation of the what's now known as NIPA. You're board secretary and director. What is it, and why is it useful?
Yes, so when the Planning Act came on stream in 2010, after the 2008 Act, I and colleagues at what is now BDB Pitmans, particularly the late Paul Thompson, thought that there should be a new association to try and make sure that this regime would actually work, because for the first time you had one infrastructure planning process across all different sectors: transport, water, waste, energy. And, to date, those sectors had each had their own different processes. So there was a crying need for an association to be formed to, work out how the new regime actually would it be implemented in practice. So we formed NIPA in October 2010. And 14 years later, it's been a great success, and we have a great, vibrant membership. And we, I think, have a good relationship with government, and I think provide them with really informed commentary, advice, views, which they happily take on board and take into consideration as they move forward in their own agenda.
Okay, no. Well, look out for, I suppose, for events that you're holding. I know that you had the National Infrastructure Commission Deputy Chair speaking recently at an event, didn't you?
We did. Yeah, I mean, so Julia Prescott spoke at our annual dinner on the 21st of November, and she spoke about bringing people back into infrastructure planning, and I think that was spot on, really, in terms of what she's saying. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about community benefit. Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that needs to be fixed. As one of those many areas I talked about earlier.
Well, I'm going to get stuck into that, and we talk slightly wider beyond Banner about the planning infrastructure bill. But just before that, what else do you get up to? I mean, apart from running, I quite often see you running around the park, and apparently you do quite a lot of skiing on 2 feet and less than 2 feet sometimes, apparently. What do you get up to? What else do you get up to when you're not lawyering?
Well, I have lots of varied interests. I love getting out there, as you say, running, skiing, that sort of stuff. I'm getting a bit older now, so having to be careful. But I like making stuff. I used to do. I have a real great interest in English furniture, and so I still do make some things when I have time. And and all the other normal stuff.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So have you got a shed full of tools then?
I do have a cellar actually full of tools, many of which my father gave to me. And there's an old boy up the road who had no children, so when he died, he left me and my brother his stuff. So
Oh, very good. No. Well, I know where to come if you need a bit of cabinetry repairs. Then Robbie's the man. Excellent.
Yeah, I can help out definitely.
Many a G clamp. Let's talk a bit more about planning. And of course, while Banner refers specifically to the judicial review process, we have of course got the planning and infrastructure bill coming down the track. As we said, it makes quite a few recommendations around the streamlining the planning process, strengthening local authority powers. And you mentioned the speech by Julia Prescott in the National Infrastructure Commission about really focusing on the needs of people, because after all, infrastructure is all about making people's lives better. I mean, how do you see the bill, the act, really helping to focus on those needs of communities?
I would like to see government being quite bold in relation to that issue and what we call community benefit. Because at the moment in planning law, we have this view, some might say this fiction, that when it comes to making decisions on applications for not just nationally significant infrastructure projects, but also local planning authority decisions, that sort of community benefit schemes aren't part of the equation, if you like. Those aren't benefits that can be formally and properly and lawfully taken into account. And that seems to me to be a bit of a nonsense. And I think government needs to say, look, this is what a good community benefit scheme should look like. Obviously, it'll differ depending on the project and the sector and the subsector, but these are the kind of key things that any community benefit scheme should do and should contain. And I think government should also change the decision-making framework so that what is in a community benefit scheme proposed by an applicant absolutely can be taken into account when it comes to conducting that planning balance at the end of the day in deciding whether a scheme should be approved or not. And that will require some primary legislation. Therefore, I would like to see the bill tackling this absolutely head on, because to date, certainly the last government really did very little on this, primarily in relation to electricity networks, and didn't really think about the broader infrastructure agenda in the context of community benefit.
Yeah. I mean, is there a risk that we are overly fixated on these major infrastructure projects in the UK at the expense of smaller, perhaps faster benefit returning local projects? Well,
we need to do both, of course, don't we? And I think I've often heard this as a criticism that there is a risk that we become fixated, and we shouldn't become fixated, and I don't believe we are. And as I say, we need to make sure that we do all of these things and have a strategy for making sure that things aren't forgotten.
Yeah, but of course you talk about strategy, and the government has also promised a 10-year national infrastructure strategy in the spring. Why is that important?
I think it's important because we just need to know. We need a roadmap, don't we? A national roadmap on our infrastructure, whatever the sector and subsector. And I think it's critically important for all concerned, not least for investors, inward and otherwise, to know, what is in the strategy for the next 10 years. Of course, let's not forget, a lot of these infrastructure projects, particularly in energy, are not funded or financed from the public sector, but many are, transport in particular. And it seems to me we simply can't keep on proceeding with projects being here 1 month, then the next month they're suddenly cancelled. And I think it's just not acceptable to have a system where projects can be cancelled with no notice. Sure, conditions change, circumstances change, and politicians must be able to review national priorities and decide whether a project that was felt to be a good project maybe should no longer proceed. But the way we do it at the moment, whether standing up at party conferences or at the dispatch box and just suddenly cancelling things, I don't think is acceptable, given how much public money is spent on these projects before they're cancelled.
Clearly, you're making reference to the HS2 Northern project there, Robbie, which you, I mean, that's still it's a moment, is it, which is filled with regret for you?
Well, I mean, clearly there was the review carried out by Doug Oakerby on HS2, commissioned by Boris Johnson, and then Rishi Sunak comes on board, and the kind of issues, particularly cost overruns and management problems that were bedeviling HS2, it seems to me that there are solutions to those that don't and shouldn't have led to the whole thing being cancelled. It just sends such a poor message to the national and international communities that we manage our major projects in that way. I think we need a system where, as I say, yes, things change. You should be able to review processes. Therefore, my hope is that this new 10-year national infrastructure strategy, it should actually mean something for a project to be included in it. And therefore, there should then be a process undergone to change it. Which,
of course, hopefully will be the role of the new National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, NISTA, which is going to be operational by spring, bringing together the IPA, Infrastructure Projects Authority, with the National Infrastructure Commission. Is that a good thing? Is that going to move the dial?
Well, I hope it's a good thing. I'm an optimist, Anthony, as you know. We still have very scant details about what NISTA will quite what it will do, and I think there's also some doubt still as to quite what NISTA will be. Will it be just the Department of HM Treasury or the Cabinet Office? I don't think it's going to be an executive agency like the National Infrastructure Commission is.
Well, with independence, you mean?
Yes, I think that is where things are going, that it will not be an executive agency, and therefore there are some concerns about its independence. But it's effectively going to have this dual role of coming up with the 10-year strategy and then presumably every 2 or 3 years with spending reviews, reviewing it. But also the second element of its dual role will be to hopefully be an enforcer to make sure that projects are delivered. Because I think that, as Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary himself, said recently, that the IPA, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, had really been more about compliance than anything else. Whereas I think the new NISTA needs to, wearing its former IPA hat, needs to be much more about enforcing delivery within Whitehall and within the executive agencies.
Yeah. So just to finish off, what happens next? You know, we've got Banner, we've got recommendations, we've got a consultation, we've got a new planning bill going hopefully into become law next year. We've got a new NISTA. How does the government, in your view, actually accelerate delivery of these nationally significant infrastructure projects? What's your advice?
Well, I mean, clearly we need the bill to be brought into Parliament as soon as possible. I think the focus often is we're going to change the world by bringing in a bill and that's going to fix everything. Of course, that's never the case, really. But it's understandable for politicians to focus on their shiny bill. My advice would be we just need to make sure that government is empowered to make all the changes that can be done in addition to the bill. So, for example, really cracking on and kicking the tyres hard on what community benefit schemes can achieve, because I believe that we can make a lot of progress at that level without just focusing on rather grander things like parliamentary bills.
Robbie, as I say, there is a lot going on, and I reckon still quite a lot of water to flow under that particular bridge. But thank you so much for joining me. I always feel like I'm constantly playing catch up in terms of what's happening because it's moving very, very fast. But thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Well, thanks, Anthony. Really enjoyed it, and let's hope we can see some real change coming through soon.
And get your consultation responses in, I imagine, in the next few days.
Well, I don't think people want to wait until the 29th of December to sort of complete it. So I certainly won't be.
Thanks a lot, Robbie. Unfortunately, that's all we got time for today. But thanks for joining me. And we got more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Robbie, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.